At some point, every Hollywood friendship reaches a moment where the curtain slips just a little, not with a public fight, not with a scandalous headline, but with silence. And when that silence comes from Taylor Swift, people notice, because Taylor doesn't drift away quietly unless something behind the scenes has gone seriously wrong. For months, fans kept asking the same question. Why did Taylor suddenly step back from Blake Lively? Why did the friendship that once looked unshakable suddenly feel distant? And now, with private messages surfacing and timelines lining up a little too neatly, the picture looks far more complicated than anyone expected. This wasn't one misunderstanding, it wasn't one bad day. It was a slow buildup of emotional pressure, blurred boundaries, and a situation that kept growing until Taylor finally seemed to say, without saying it at all, "I can't do this anymore." And the text messages may explain exactly why. At first, everything looked normal. Blake and Taylor had been close for years, public support, private jokes, mutual admiration. But late last year, the tone started to change. Blake began sending long, emotionally loaded messages in the middle of the night, messages that weren't just updates but confessions, reassurances, requests, emotional check-ins layered on top of ongoing crisis talk. And while Taylor initially responded with care, something shifted. One message from Blake stood out. It wasn't dramatic on its own. It was apologetic, self-aware, almost nervous. She asked Taylor if everything was okay, saying she felt like a bad friend, worried she'd done something wrong. On the surface, it sounded thoughtful, but underneath it carried something heavier, a need for validation at a moment when Taylor herself was stretched thin. Taylor's response was polite, calm, and revealing in a way only someone exhausted knows how to be. She admitted she'd been feeling a shift in how Blake talked to her. Not anger, not betrayal, just distance. She explained that the messages felt less like a conversation between friends and more like carefully written statements, almost corporate, almost rehearsed, and she missed the version of Blake that spoke freely, darkly, honestly, not as part of a we, but as herself. That message mattered because it was the first clear boundary Taylor set. But that wasn't the whole story. Blake didn't pull back. If anything, she leaned in harder. She joked about paranoia, about phones not being safe, about assuming every message might someday be public. She talked about reading texts not meant for her, about losing trust in digital communication entirely. And suddenly, what had been personal stress began to feel like crisis management. Taylor tried to reassure her. She didn't escalate, she didn't confront, she softened the moment, but the dynamic had changed. The friendship no longer felt equal. It felt like Taylor was being asked to carry something heavy and carry it constantly. And then the situation expanded beyond the two of them. Around the same time, reports suggest Taylor was quietly pulled into creative discussions involving Justin Baldoni and a film Blake was working on. According to messages that later surfaced, Blake allegedly asked Taylor to reinforce certain creative choices in front of Justin, framing them as exciting, powerful, and essential. Taylor agreed, not because she wanted influence, but because she wanted to help a friend. At least, that's how it started.
What makes this complicated is that Taylor later publicly minimized her involvement, saying she simply contributed a song and happened to be present at the same location. The messages tell a more coordinated story. Not illegal, not criminal, but intentional, planned. And that matters because it placed Taylor closer to the center of a growing conflict than she may have wanted to be. And once media entered the picture, things escalated fast. As whispers of legal action and exposés grew louder, Blake's messages reportedly became more intense, more urgent, more political. There were discussions about optics, about timing, about articles that hadn't dropped yet but were clearly anticipated. Taylor knew when a New York Times piece was coming. She knew lawsuits were being prepared. She knew public narratives were forming. At first, she believed in it. When the article finally hit, Taylor's initial reaction was supportive. She believed it would protect other women. She believed there was proof. She believed the truth was being handled carefully. In private messages, she expressed relief, validation, even pride. But belief doesn't mean comfort, because after that moment, the pressure didn't stop. It intensified. Taylor was looped into group chats, messages, commentary, reactions to media coverage. There were discussions about how quickly things were turning, how rare it was for public opinion to flip so fast. And slowly, subtly, Taylor's role shifted from friend to asset. And that's when things started to feel dangerous. Behind the scenes, Blake and Ryan Reynolds were reaching out to Hollywood's inner circle: Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, Bradley Cooper. Messages framed as zero-pressure requests, casual invitations, friendly screenings. But attached to those asks were long explanations, allegations, emotional unloading, stories portraying Justin as dangerous, manipulative, cult-like, and unstable. Some responded politely, some stayed quiet, some deflected. What stood out most wasn't support, it was distance, and Taylor noticed. Because while Blake kept escalating the narrative, Taylor began stepping back emotionally. Her responses shortened, her engagement cooled. She didn't push back aggressively, but she stopped matching Blake's intensity. And according to people following the timeline closely, that may have been the moment Blake realized something important. Taylor wasn't fully on board anymore. From that point on, speculation online intensified. Some claim Blake felt abandoned. Others believe she feared losing Taylor's public support at the worst possible time. There were rumors, and they must be framed as rumors, that tension grew over whether Taylor would publicly stand beside Blake if things turned ugly. Some fans even speculate that private messages became leverage. There is no proof of blackmail. None, but the fact that people are even asking that question says a lot about how volatile the situation had become. What is clear is this: Taylor stopped participating. She didn't issue statements, she didn't escalate publicly, she didn't deny or defend beyond what was necessary. She chose distance, and in Hollywood, distance is rarely accidental. Taylor has built her career on understanding power, on timing, on knowing when to speak and when silence speaks louder. And whatever she saw behind the scenes made her decide that continuing down this path wasn't worth it. Meanwhile, the media landscape turned into a battlefield. Stories began appearing in People magazine, pushing one narrative while other details quietly contradicted it. Crisis PR specialists were added, statements were refined, language became sharper, and suddenly what had started as a creative conflict looked like a full-scale PR war. Not a legal war, a perception war, and Taylor wanted no part of it. Looking back, the imbalance in the friendship becomes hard to ignore. Blake's messages are long, emotional, praise-heavy, almost worshipful at times. Taylor's replies grow shorter, kinder but firmer, more distant. It feels less like two equals and more like someone trying to pull reassurance from someone who no longer has the capacity to give it. That dynamic alone can end friendships even without fame involved. Add power, add lawsuits, add media pressure, add millions of eyes waiting for you to choose a side, and suddenly stepping away isn't cold, it's survival. What this situation really exposes isn't one villain or one hero, it's how Hollywood relationships collapse when private loyalty becomes public currency, when support turns into expectation, when friendship turns into strategy. Taylor didn't turn on Blake, she didn't attack her, she didn't leak anything, she simply stopped engaging at the level Blake needed her to. And sometimes that's the loudest statement of all, because when everything becomes a move on the chessboard, the people who quietly leave the game may be the only ones protecting themselves. So the real question isn't whether Taylor and Blake are still friends, it's whether real friendship can survive when fame, pressure, and narrative control take over everything. And in a town built on image, maybe silence isn't betrayal, maybe it's clarity. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Hollywood's most confusing fallout, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next, because behind every headline, there's always another story waiting to surface.